This is the I Read Comic Books podcast, the very best podcast for regular comic book fans. I'm your host, Mike Rapin, and joining me this week, the guy who rammed into my car. This week, I'm joined by Nick White.
Honk, honk.
Nick, I'm glad to be here with you to talk about our favorite series in the entire world, the longest running series in IRCB history. We are here to talk about Volume 10 of Ice Cream Man. This covers issues 37 through issue 40 of the Ice Cream Man series. So just 4 issues to get you through this. And quite honestly, this is the volume that contains the Eisner nominated issue, if I'm not mistaken. This is the big one. It's the two-parter. I think this is like the first ever true two-parter in the volume. That's issues 39 and 40. And then we've got the classic single issue stories of issue 37 and 38. So I guess, Nick, what's your overall thoughts of this volume? How are you feeling before we dive in to talk about each one?
Yeah, and just a brief primer for anyone who's weirdly decided that this is the very first recording of IRCB podcast that you're interested in, I guess.
Sure.
So this is written by W. Maxwell Prince, art by Martín Morazzo, colors by Chris O'Halloran, letters by Good Old Neon. As Mike said, this is volume 10, published in November of 2024. Originally published as Ice Cream Man 37 through 40 between October of 2023 and July of 2024. For those curious who read in single issues, that is Flight of the Figgly Bumps, Escape from Garyland, and Depression. Gosh, it is Depression. God, yeah, Freudian slip there. Decompression in a Wreck, Part 1 and Part 2. The final 2 issues were republished in October of 24 as Ice Cream Man Decompression in a Wreck Deluxe Edition number 1, with the new cover and bonus materials. And in May of 2025, Ice Cream Man 39, Decompression in a Wreck Part 1 was nominated for an Eisner Award. Overall, especially I would say compared to Volume 9, I think that the stories here are sort of on the same level in terms of not being as Caleb focused, not being as Rick focused. They're not really at the forefront. They're more in the background. Although, I mean, we can get into the more minutiae involving that.
Sure. Yeah.
Overall, I would say I think this is a stronger volume than Volume 9. I like the way that the issues interplay with each other, almost in a way as if this was written as with the arc in mind. Obviously, this book has had callbacks galore all over the place. Sometimes you don't see somebody for 5 to 10 issues, but it really feels like within this arc, there are callbacks that are very strongly pulling to other parts of the arc themselves. And I really thought that was well done.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about, previous volumes of this series, and, I think Morazzo and Maxwell Prince, they do this semi-regularly, right? There will be like an arc, right? Each volume that's collected, they kind of reference back to each other. But I do agree with you. I think this one had a bit more stronger, I guess, references. And for anyone who's been listening to this series and just binged, volumes 1 through 9 in our discussion, we probably say this every single episode, that there's these little attachment pieces that kind of just keep pulling at each other as the series goes on. But I do think that this one had a very interesting, like, roundedness to it. I mean, maybe that's what you get when you have two issues that follow each other ish, right? Like the interesting part about 39 and 40 is that you can kind of read them from one side and it doesn't really affect the other story, or the story itself. But we'll get into that. So I guess I don't know, Nick, do you want to just dive right into issue 37, Flight of the Figgly Bumps? Because I didn't know what this issue was going to be about, but then again, I never know what this issue or these issues are going to be about. So what was your take on this book or this issue?
I think probably the biggest thing that still bugs me, and honestly, if I had more time and more of a willingness to go back and really, really dig deep, I could answer this question, which was, have we seen these guys before?
Yes, we have. They have shown up in like one-off little bits as hallucinations, as I think there was an issue where a guy was he was going through game shows or whatever, and he comes across one of them being like tortured in some way. Not maybe tortured, but
yeah.
It was, we've seen these little monsters before, but we've never seen them more as like than just bit characters. And I have to wonder if that was like an invention. These Figgly Bumps is an invention, as just like let's take a furry little monster and destroy it. And now like they're like, no, let's do a whole issue that's not only about the death of an author, a person who took their own life, but also like these cutesy cuddly little monsters Vietnam. And that's all I can think of is like Ewoks in Vietnam. Like that's what this issue says to me.
Yeah, there's something about the Figgly Bumps that really reminds me of like 1980s puppetry in movies, where it's like they're cute, but there's also something very weird and terrifying about them. And there's like a weird deadness to their eyes that I think what I compared it to is like the freaking dragon from Neverending Story or whatever. I was like, it's got the same kind of like, it's weirding me out, and I get I'm supposed to like get along with this, but obviously within this arc, we have two different stories going on. We have a frame narrative and an inner narrative, and in the frame narrative, we're dealing with these siblings. I think his name was Mike, but now I'm like, was it really Mike? Because there's another Mike on top of you. I think
his name was Brian. His name was Brian.
Brian and Grace. Brian and Grace are going through this stuff in this house. We find out that it is the home of their brother Brian. Yeah, that's right. The younger brother, I think was Brian. Was he younger? Gosh, we're getting this all right. So it's two siblings. They're going through the stuff with their brother. We find out their brother was this cartoonist. He was known for drawing these Figgly Bump cartoons that were apparently very popular. And as we go through some of the other issues in this series, I think even in Decompression of a Wreck Part 2, one of the drivers of the truck is actually watching this on a show. So we know that they're this pretty big deal. And it kind of becomes a discussion with the two siblings, and more of a debate as we find out that Brian killed himself, and it turns into some real light, easy breezy fun, just shooting the shit topics of one, whether or not their brother is in hell. That's a great one. And two, whether or not the act of suicide is a selfish one. So just some real fun, just low key shit. And
I mean, it's classic. This is classic Ice Cream Man fare at this point, right?
100%.
Like we're going to take an idea and we're just going to literally talk about it on page inside of the surrealness of the Ice Cream Man universe, where these Figgly Bumps are like the most adorable love thing, despite how terrifying Morazzo draws them to be. I mean, this guy has an art style that, like, when he leans into it being a little weird and creepy, it super works. And here, like, he's riding that line of like, yes, these are kind of cute, but also the dead glass eyes really puts me off, right? Just like you were saying before. Of course, and then the masking of, we're also going to have like very philosophical, existential discussions about what happens when you die versus, and what is the act of suicide, like you said, is it's very, I don't know, like, I expect no less, and yet every time I am shocked by where Morazzo takes.
Here we are again.
Where W. Maxwell Prince takes the story. It's so bizarre. I don't know. Like, I didn't think that a story about the Vietnam for these cute little fuzzy animals was going to be also a story that has this very tough subject, I think, and they're just very blatant and blunt about it, because like there's no getting around it with these characters. They're brother and sister. They can talk about these things openly without having to worry about offending each other. At least they thought.
Yeah, right.
Until the conversation continues.
Yeah, and then within that, they discover, I think it's some concept art, or was it a poster? I think it was a poster for one of these Figgly Bumps narratives where they go to war. And it's clearly meant to be based on the Vietnam War. And we follow this Figgly Bump, whose name is Giggly Winks. And he's going to fight the Bob Bots in order to defend Odoraville. And much like any other like 80s cartoon, they live in these cutesy, mushroom-like, colorful-looking houses that feel like some like mashup between like Candyland and Bag End. Yeah, it really looks like something out of a Saturday morning cartoon, right? Where like Scruff McGruff is going to show up in a PSA and tell you that like if you smoke marijuana, there's like 100% guarantee you're going to like kill your whole family in like a catatonic state. Like it's got that vibe. And it starts to go through a lot of the war movie cliches. You've got like the drill sergeant who's got the cigar and he's like Arlie Army from Full Metal Jacket. And they're going to do their training, their boot camp, base camp, training camp. What is it called? Basic training. Basic training. Yeah, they're going to do training. Sure. They're going to do their basic training and learn how to shoot the gun and all of this stuff because they're getting ready to fight the Bob Bots. And throughout all of this, like all of them are like they're always weirdly self-aware of like how cute they are. You know, like the sergeant is like, you know, you guys need to get your cute little asses in line or whatever. Like there's always this weirdly like self-aware idea of like how adorable they're supposed to be. And they go to fight the Bob Bots, which clearly I want to know if this was the inspiration because it seems like they clearly look like Rob the Robot. That like was packaged with the NES system. It looks like Rob the Robot.
I mean, I'm guessing that the direction between Prince and Morazzo was draw something that looks cute, like a toy robot, but would also decimate these little marshmallow shooting doofuses, right?
Exactly.
Like, it's such a ridiculous thing. Of course, it's the perfect idea of like pairing together the absurdity of cuteness with devastating war a la Vietnam / World War One. Like it's a combination of trench warfare and Vietnam and World War II. Like it's very surreal. I mean, as like a like I don't know, an inevitability, I guess, that these monsters end up at. But yeah, I don't know. It's very. I'm looking at the pages right now, and I'm just like, these things would look like cute little toys, and I would expect like if I had one, it would roll around and probably make a little like firing noise. But what we get on page instead is just absolute horror.
Right. It's like whatever you thought was going to happen. I mean, if you've been reading Ice Cream Man, like I think you kind of probably know that this is not going to be super cute. They're not going to win the day. Their marshmallow guns are not going to somehow blow up these metallic robots. And instead, these like, you know, Terminator machines are just going to tear them apart. And you're just going to be blessed with pages and pages of fiddly wink, giggly bump, figgly bump, whatever, just bloodshed and gore and terror. And, you know, first off, I got to hand it to Martin Morazzo. Just creates a whole nother universe for this book. Like, you know, obviously a lot of the time he's drawing somewhat normal people doing sometimes normal things. This is a completely different universe of things. And it's just really impressive. I think the biggest issue for me, and because I'm stupid, maybe I didn't make this connection, and maybe you know where to place it, maybe it's not there at all, was what is the connection between the frame narrative and the actual narrative? Is it just God, I don't know. It's interesting that after Figgly Bump, Giggly Wink, Jesus, here we go. After Giggly Wink dies, and we of course have the cliche narrative of his widow, who's of course got the locket with her pictures in it because of course she does, and he's dead. And she's talking with her mother about moving. She calls it a suicide mission, and I just went,
It seems like an interesting way to like connect that word, which doesn't seem to have a place in the Figgly Wumps universe. I'm never going to get the words right. Figgly, whatever. Listen, I think Morazzo and Prince intentionally named all these fucking characters like this just to throw like people like us off. No, I don't think that that's necessarily the point, right? So the thing that the brother says at one point in the story is, I don't think he ever published this one. But as we get different angles around the room, you can see that their brother Brian, he had drawn multiple pieces of this, right? He had drawn a huge poster. He had multiple pages drawn. I think the idea is that the narrative was there the entire time, and he had surrounded himself with this devastating, dark, violent thing. And I wonder if that's like classic me just trying to look beyond the veil of whatever is being presented in front of me, but like, is this an idea that like he was surrounded by these dark thoughts all the time, even though like, and if you look around the room later in the issue, you see that all of the happier go luckier stuff is like further away from him, from his drawing table. All the Vietnam style art and all the violent stuff is near him, or like the soldiers and the guns and all that other stuff. So I wonder if there's like this thing that's being said here that like war is hell, and it was inside this guy's head constantly, and that was ultimately what led him to take his own life, right? I mean, you could say that Ice Cream Man infected the fiction in which he was writing, and therefore he was consumed by it in some capacity, right? Because that's the thing that happens at the end is one of the little wiggly bumps, whatever, says, hey, we're gonna go see this new guy named Ice Cream Man, and it's like, oh fuck, right? Like it's getting beyond the reality of the Ice Cream Man story that we're reading, and it's now infecting the fiction in a way that it is becoming its own narrative, or it's becoming its own reality. So I don't know, that's also weird. A little thing I noticed. But yeah, I think the brother is looking through all the pages of this story, and he's reading it as the rest of the story that we're seeing in the quote unquote real world is happening. Yeah.
As for like some overarching connections that I saw, obviously they mentioned that the moving boxes are going to Holt Storage. Obviously we know Holt is a megacorp in this whole thing that has to do with Rick. You can see that there's framed art on the walls that looks like a Figgly Bump variant, if you will, of Ice Cream Man #1. That's the one with him at the bottom. There's also a cover of Ice Cream, that's an homage to Ice Cream Man 9, which is the skeleton face with the teeth centered, as well as Ice Cream Man 29. If you want to really go crazy psycho, because of course that's what I'm here for, there's a little framed portrait that appears to be a rough sketch of what would eventually be the cover of Ice Cream Man 35, which is the book of curious creatures or whatever it's called.
Interesting.
If you look, there's what all of the other things look like polished posters, but in a little frame is what looks like a rough drawing of the whatever it is, the Book of Improbable Monsters or whatever it's called. It looks like a snake's head, and like I don't remember. Sorry guys, like I don't have a photographic memory for this. If you really want to go crazy with that, like if this drawing is not a Figgly Bump take on an ICM cover, you want to go crazy. This one's free, Maxwell, Prince, and Morazzo.
Okay.
Does this somehow intimate that Brian had something to do with creating the Book of Necessary Monsters? There's a crazy idea. Now, I think the book is much older, but it's weird because it looks like a rough sketch. It doesn't look like a finished work.
Or is it not a sketch so much as this guy has like an original drawing of the cover that he framed for himself as a fan of said book?
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
Yeah.
I know that's like, I went super deep on that, but I looked at that and I was like, this is a little strange, because clearly I think that's what it's meant to be.
We're here with this series specifically to put all these dots together. I mean, the one thing I noticed is that there is a Manny the Mannequin from Art Brut is in the background of one of the final pages of the issue.
Oh, that's what that was. Yeah. I couldn't place it.
He's not putting it there for no reason.
I couldn't place it. Yeah. And then I think, obviously, as you said, the biggest Rick Caleb connection here, of course, is that, the widow of Giggly Winks, Wiggly Bumps,
whatever.
Giggly Winks. I had it right. Says that, okay, we need to leave Dodge, and that a kind soul, the superhero, interesting choice of words, believe it or not, has offered to house our entire species in his magical ice palace in the Arctic. Here's an interesting thing here, okay?
Okay.
If we think about superheroes that have magical ice palaces in the Antarctic, what comes to mind?
I mean, there's the Superman.
Yeah.
But this is south. Antarctic is south, right?
Oh, fuck me. I can never keep that shit straight.
So, I mean, that is clearly an obvious connection. I think in more dedicated Ice Cream Man fans will know this. I think we saw Figgly Bumps in the past in a similar situation like this that they're describing they're going to.
See, I thought they were in the procession, which was in the bonus story Paralogue, which is at the end of Ice Cream Man 25, which is the one about the plane going down. And we see everybody showing up for the trial of Ricardus, if you remember that. And all of these weird creatures are winding around this path for the trial. And I was like, oh, well, I think I saw them there. And I literally went back and I read that whole part. They were not there. My brain put them in there. So
there, regardless, as we said at the start, like these monsters existed, but we can't harp just on this one issue, Nick. So final thoughts here on this one. I think I said my two big pieces on this. So what are your last thoughts here?
Yeah, honestly, for me, I think it's talking about it now. I think there's a lot here to dissect, but for me, I think it's also not that we have to quantify or grade things, but for me, it is the weakest issue of the 4.
Sure.
But there's still, like I said, there's a lot of little things to parse out, and there's so much little things in the background that you can kind of look at and go, does this have meaning, or was Morazzo told, like, just put some stuff on the wall?
Listen,
and those
we'll
two
never know.
Fucking idiots.
We'll never true know. Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah,
we'll get to it. So issue 38 is maybe one of the most absurd ones we've read in a minute. And I know that we just talked about little monsters, but like I think this gets into the more like scientifically weird and heavy quotes, which like there's no science in Ice Cream Man. It's all just weird demon magic. But this is Escape from Garyland, issue number 38.
I really love this issue. Yeah.
And I guess like the quick summary is there is a compound full of Garys. Yeah. And they all have very specific jobs, and they do their specific jobs every day. They get to eat ice cream every day. Some of them are raking, in particular the Gary we follow for this issue, Gary 38. He rakes. That's all he does. Some Garys are fixing the walls that they live within. Some Garys work in the food court. Some of them are security officers. Some of them, if there's a job to be done, it seems like they have a Gary for it, and they're all numbered 0, I guess. 1 maybe through N. We don't know how many Garys there are.
We actually do know how many Garys there are.
We do. Okay, tell me.
There are. Oh boy, I wrote it down. I think there's 420. Yeah, sorry. There's 478 Garys in total. Yes, that is covered.
Okay. I must have glanced over that, but it's a very interesting issue. As we, what does a world look like when you're living in a compound of just yourselves? And, you have very strict rules that you have to follow. And we see some reoccurring characters. So, Nick, I don't know. Tell us more about this issue.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, fun, messed up thought experiment, as Mike got at. These Garys live in Gary land, and each one has a designated Gary purpose. This issue loves coming up with this pseudo bullshit abbreviation terminology. So every Gary has a designated Gary purpose. And pretty quickly you notice that things are like already pretty grade A fucked up.
Right.
Because Gary 38 is raking these leaves, but there are no trees in Garyland. And despite that, the leaves literally show up every single day. And it's ultimately, like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. You can do the work. It's not really going to make a difference. And yeah, it's so automatically you go, well, what's going on? They must be clones. But of course they're not clones, because clone is the C word in Garyland.
Right.
Which the C word is PGV, which is prohibited Gary vocab. You can't use that word in Garyland. No word on if you can use the actual C word in Garyland. They don't cover that. That's not part of the rules for Garyland. Interestingly, madness and anxiety are also considered PGV at one point, which I thought was very interesting. So Gary 38 is still pretty game. He's still pretty used to it. He doesn't really have any questions about things. He thinks this is normal. He tends to get lucky and get double ice cream whenever he goes to the cafeteria. He thinks it's great. But there's another Gary who shows up in the cafeteria, Gary 59, And Gary 59 is convinced that they're clones. He thinks, look at all these activities we're doing. They seem pretty futile. We're doing the same thing every day. And even when we do our work the next day, it seems like our work has just been actively undone. What's going on? Like, there's got to be a bigger world out there. There are, ice cream flavors other than vanilla. And Gary 58 or 59, I think it was 59, is very quickly tased and carried off, and we don't see him again. He's zapped, and we're told that he is, quote unquote, going to a spa. He's going to a spa, despite the fact that we have seen something like this happen, or we're told this has happened with other Garys, and none of them have ever been seen again. Maybe they're going to the farm. Who knows? And after this incident with Gary 59, we're introduced to these two doctors, Dr. Nake and Dr. Sabrina, who we've actually met before, all the way back in Ice Cream Man 30.
Mm-hmm.
And they interview Gary, and they talk about, okay, like, you saw this stuff that Gary 59 was talking about. Like, do you believe it? Do you think there's any validity to it? Do you still hold true to basically all of the rules about Garyland, which includes the fact that, we all just look alike, quote, and also happen to have the same name. It happens all the time, unquote. And once they're convinced that Gary 38 and I think Gary 14 is his buddy, they leave. But we can talk about those two doctors later. But anyway, I mean, Mike, you can. What do you think about, where this goes after we have this little incident, right?
Well, yeah, this follows, like, I don't want to say a classic story, like, I feel like we've seen plenty of stories like this before.
Yeah,
where,
I thought a lot of like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or
right. There's a homogenized place that people live in, and somebody, breaks that homogeny and says, like, hey, there's something more out there. And, I think in defense of this issue, I think W. Maxwell Prince and Martin Morazzo do a great job of really staving off that predictability a little bit by saying, hey, this Gary's like, well, I know that I've seen this and I've heard this, but it's fine. I'm just going to move on.
Right.
And it's not until his best friend succumbs to this. And again, maybe you could say this is also following that rubric of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I think that's a perfect example of, like someone close to this Gary that we've been following suddenly is affected by this, like, change where they say, we need to get the hell out of here. And he moves on to go, eventually does such a thing as he follows this letter that he gets that says, here's what you need to do to escape. I think what is interesting about this feels like the seed of a bigger story, right? Like, this feels like the origin of something where Gary 38 is going to show up at some point again, because we've seen these doctors before. We know that these doctors have, like, screwed around with people in the past, and they're clearly still, again, working perfectly fine. Now, how do you grow a bunch of, I would say, late 30s, early 40s clones so quickly?
Not even just a bunch, right? 478. Yeah.
Right. That's the thing that I'm wondering about, right? So it'll be interesting to see if there's more beyond just this. But I did find it to be like a nice, like, oh, right, there are, like, you can still take the Ice Cream Man, I don't know, brand of storytelling or style of storytelling and apply it to these, I don't, quote unquote, classic dystopian narratives. And it can still be interesting because you catch all these little tiny things that make it unique to this world. So I don't know, that's where my thoughts landed on this. I thought this was like a fine issue, but, like, I don't know if you had more on this, because we do discover, right, like, as he moves out, like, that all the Garys, they didn't go to a spa, their bodies are just piles, like, they're dead, but he ends up escaping, and the issue kind of ends with him running off. But yeah, I don't know. What's your thought on this, Nick?
Yeah, I think the main thing I did once I was able to make the connection with the doctors is I was like, oh, like, what's the bigger story here? Because I couldn't quite remember how that all played out. And so, as a refresher, maybe for you or for anyone else listening, Dr. Nake and Dr. Sabrina, they were in, what was it, Ice Cream Man 30. And we thought in 30 that Dr. Nake was actually, he was pretending to be a subject and Sabrina was pretending to be an assistant to Dr. Benjamin. You remember Dr. Benjamin? He was the main character in number 30. He was running a clinical trial for something called Neuramaze for Holt Industries. If I recall, I think the whole idea with the drug was that like there was I know it involved they called it low level hallucinogens, and the idea of whether or not those could help people. And by the end of the issue, you find out that Dr. Nake and Dr. Sabrina are actually running a secret experiment, and Dr. Benjamin is actually the real subject. So it's an experiment within the experiment, and he's actually the subject. And we find out that they're running their own special experiment. And at first I was like, gosh, like, was their whole thing sanctioned by Holt Industries, or were they doing their own thing? But if you go back at the beginning of the book, they're at Holt Testing Clinical Trials Building 1. And at the end, when the reveal is made, they're actually at Holt Clinical Testing Trials Building 2. So yes, it is run by Holt. It's in whatever they're doing, it's endorsed by Holt, and it's being run in a completely different place. And you can tell that clearly Holt is running the show anyway, because if you really want to go crazy stupid about it, if you look at the doors to the cafeteria, they've got that yellow ice cream cone symbol on both of the doors. And so it's like, again, like fucking Martin Morazzo draws a triangle and we're like, oh, we get it.
I know. Like, which, like, you know, I have a lot of thoughts about like the idea that we've been trying to string a lot of narrative together around this, but I think I'll talk about it at the end of our discussion today. But I don't know. It's interesting, you know, again, to see reoccurring characters in this series. It feels like a very, very rare thing. It's one
usually
thing
because they end up dead. So well,
they either end up dead or they end up as background characters, right? I think like
go ahead.
There's like the ambulance characters, you know, we've seen the Rockin' all the time,
the guy with the balloon,
all the time,
the kid with the balloon, so fucking scary every goddamn time. The
little goblin, you know, that was a reoccurring character for a little while. Like it's all there, and it's interesting, like when those things come up, because they do usually feel like background, right? Whereas in this specific issue, we see characters that show up not just once but multiple times in the issue, influencing the direction of whatever's happening, which I don't know, like Ice Cream Man used to be that figure, and now where is Ice Cream Man, right? And instead it's like there's these proxies, which I don't know. There's maybe more questions to be asked than I think we have time for, but it's interesting to see that that's how the stories have developed, where Ice Cream Man is just this figment. And I know we've talked about this before, of like Ice Cream Man has drifted so far back because he's stirred so much chaos, or maybe the chaos was there to begin with and he just needed to kind of nudge it. So it's interesting to see how that, but again, we see this Holt Industries, Holt Corporation, whatever, is kind of the backbone in a lot of these stories. Even the next two issues, you know, they are a piece of the narrative that kind of link the entire universe together. And I don't know if that's a matter of like made up NBC bullshit where, like, you know, sitcoms had to use all the same like fake brands in order to not have to pay out to anybody, but in comics it's like, why don't we just unite this under Holt? But it's like, if you wanted to go that route, you could make up a new industry every issue.
You totally could.
The consistency is the thing that I think we are glomming onto, and it has us wondering, how does this all play back together? How does it all tie together? You know, will we find out? Probably not, but
the whole idea that and this has been true for a while in this book, Ice Cream Man in a lot of ways has frequently been more of an observer, and whatever mechanisms and things that he has established and put in motion, they're working overtime all by themselves, and he doesn't really need to sort of push and shove on things anymore. I would say the one thing I would be curious to see with this issue and where this goes is like what, I mean, I would love to know, like, what was if there was, what was the purpose of this experiment? Like, what were they trying to do? What were they trying to accomplish? Did they achieve it? Did it fail? I mean, I would just be curious to know, like, what was the end game, right? Because, like, obviously with issue 30, it was a drug was being tested. Although we could maybe even argue at this point, you want to go real crazy, what if all of that was literally fake? You know what I mean? Like, all of that was all of that was just a setup for the study that was really being done at building number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if like Neuramaze was literally just a gigantic cover? Like, it wasn't even meant to accomplish or do anything in its own right. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see more of these guys, because it's fascinating. But yeah, I thought it was a fun what if crazy issue, that obviously has some sort of philosophical underpinnings about, what is my job, what is my purpose, is there, there has to be more to this, is there more to this, and just yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and we get Gary at the end kind of saying, like, finally accepting it all as he sees beyond the wall. This is, again, one of those weird issues of Ice Cream Man where it kind of ends in a weirdly positive way, right?
Yeah.
Where, like, Gary gets away, right? Like, this is one of those few instances in this run, or this series, where, like, characters we follow don't just end up dying gruesome deaths.
Right.
It's kind of nice, but where is Gary going to end up? That's what I'm wondering. And I have a gut feeling we'll see him again in the future, but I haven't read beyond the volume, so we'll see.
Yeah, and to which I would say, I believe it's that Gary that we actually see later in this volume, but we'll get there. Get there.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's get into it right now. I mean, like 39 and 40, kind of hard to talk about separately, but I think we should, because they are distinct issues, even though they are tied together so closely. So I'll just pitch to you, Nick. Like, tell us about what 39 is. Tell us about Ice Cream Man 39.
Yeah, and as you got at, like, both of these issues can sort of be addressed separately, but also they really need to be sort of looked at as a whole. As they bring up right at the beginning of the story, like, this story is only 5 seconds long in theory, and it follows a family, the Johnson family. They're driving in their car down the road. It follows a pair of truckers. They work for Holt Dairy. They're towing, or they're carrying a bunch of cows and ice cream and things like that. And they end up in a terrible head-on collision. That really is, in some ways, the whole story, and yet not the whole story.
Yeah. I mean, this is maybe one of the most fascinating issues of Ice Cream Man we've seen in a while, in that it's trying to do more, I think, than just spook us, right? Be the horror comic. It's really digging into the shit of, like, discussing comic book
meta
analysis.
It's so meta.
Also, and also being very meta without stepping into the real world that we live in, I guess. Like, I feel like this is the thing that I really have to applaud Morazzo's writing throughout this whole series. Whenever he's done issues where, like, he's talking to the reader, Prince, when Prince is talking to the reader, it doesn't feel like I'm being talked to, right? It feels like it's being written in universe in a meta way, right? Like, he's never talking about Mike, who lives in the real reality that I'm in. He's talking to like a fictional person who's reading this comic. At least that's how it plays off to me. Like, it never feels like I'm being explained to. It's like I'm reading a story where someone is being explained to.
It doesn't feel like it's
surreal.
Suddenly turning into, like, edutainment, right? Where it's like, okay, we're going to have a college lecture now about the idea, the concept of decompression within storytelling, right? It's sort of like, okay, like, we're talking about this, but we're talking about it within this pre-existing framework that we're already familiar with. Yeah.
Which the only reason I bring that up is because there are other books that are out today, right? Like, FML is a fantastic comic book. I cannot explain how much I love that book. And yet, when the book talks to me as the reader, right, in the narrative that Kelly Sue DeConnick uses, it feels like I'm being talked to, person in real life. And there's a couple of other books that have this, have a similar kind of tone where they're snarky, they're talking out of the context. You get a lot of Marvel books like this sometimes.
Fourth wall breaking,
fourth wall breaking stuff. But this book, it just feels different, and I don't know what that is. I don't know how the Prince has done it, but, like, he makes me feel like I'm observing something I shouldn't be observing. And maybe it's the subject matter of this book or this specific issue that does that. But
there's something about the narrator within this book that it feels like, and this is so hard to adequately explain, but it feels like the narrator exists within, perhaps like above, but not outside of the world of this book. And it's not
exactly
an omniscient narrator from our universe, right?
Yeah, like this narrator could somehow be infected or influenced by Ice Cream Man at some
and
point.
in some way, we've debated on several occasions if this narrator, this omniscient narrator, is someone that we know, or whether it is actually Rick or someone perhaps.
Caleb,
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. But anyways, that's getting beyond the scope of this issue. Tell us more about where this book goes, because like it is short, but it's also very long. It's somehow 28 pages.
Right. So the main concept that Prince wants to get into is, as I mentioned earlier, the idea of decompression, which he describes as, quote, a way to draw out scenes of common action over many panels, which makes sense because as he covers, this is a story that literally, if you didn't stop, if you just sort of let it play out at the, I guess you would say, the normal speed of life, it would last 5 seconds. It's a car crash. But he's going to draw it out, and we're going to over 28 pages, as he says. Basically, I should be able to do this in 3 panels. He even admits that. He's like, I could do this in 3 panels. I probably could do it in 3 panels, but it's going to take 28 pages for, quote, the Johnson's hearts one by one to stop beating forever. Jesus, bud, come on.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a grim story, right? It is maybe one of in my mind, like just bleakest stories in this book. Like we've had plenty of deaths and murder and over the top, like Rube Goldberg machine styled kills, right, in this series. And yet this is so true to life, horrifying. And I think the way he approaches the story is like from such a clinical perspective. It feels grosser somehow. You know what I mean?
Well, even to sort of hit at the basic idea of decompression, like it's almost like, and I even did this without thinking about it, like if you're watching a movie, like for example, there are just things you just don't watch. Like if you've ever seen American History X, I have never seen the curb stomping part because I have always turned away. I know it happens. I don't want anything to do with it. I just like the 1 or 2 times I've seen that, I've never seen the scene. I just can't bear. I look away, and it happens over a couple seconds, but that's just how it happens. This book, like I see the part where we're getting to the car crash, and like I sort of like looked away, and I'm like, oh God, I don't want to deal with this. And I like look down to the next panel, and it's like, oh, we're still doing this. We're still there. Yeah. We're still going through this.
We're doing a thing that is wholly unique to comics. That they try to do this in movies all the time, right? They try to do this in other mediums, and I think it's not as effective here because, like we've said millions of times on the show and other places, like comics are a place where you read things at your own pace. So like to decompress a moment like this, a 5-second moment, as he says, into 28 pages means that you're sitting with this thing for so long, it becomes like hot and gross and real almost, despite it being just a drawing, which like I do have to credit Morazzo for this entire issue. Like every panel, I think for the most part, I don't think he's reusing a lot of art because you see subtle differences between
faintly, very faintly, like tenths of seconds or hundredths of seconds are going by. Yeah, and
little bits of movement in the panels, and I'm like,
I was looking for that too.
I think he's drawing a lot of this. Yeah, like I think he's drawing a vast majority of this, and it's very, very impressive.
And I think to sort of piggyback on what you said, it's not only just the reader gets to decide at what pace they read. The writer and the artist also, by the art of decompression, they get to decide how long you get to sit with things, whether you want to sit with things or not. You're going to. And yeah, it's tough. Like we have like 4 or 5 panels of this poor woman having her knees fly up and bash her in the mouth, and slowly you watch her teeth fly out, and it's like, whew. Wow. And again, like kudos to Morazzo. Like, you did a great job drawing some awful stuff. But I think what's interesting is, and I think this is obviously such a strong theme in Ice Cream Man, which is that like, there's always like maybe a sliver, and it's frequently a sliver, but there's like sort of a silver lining on things. And within this book, they get at the idea that, sure, with decompression, we can make you sit with some pretty awful stuff forever. But do you know how much time exists in between these frames? Infinity. infinity exists, and because of that, he goes in and he talks about the father of the family growing up and sort of falling in love and all these other things, and you want to say he has his life flash before his eyes, but the book very clearly comes forward and says, like, if you think that's what's happening, that's not exactly what's happening. It's not that trite, I think, as he calls it. And it's interesting because with the parents, as I said, you sort of watch them grow up, but when you're dealing with these two kids, you sort of have the son ends up sort of looking forward at what he could have become, what he would have become, what he would have done, and so he looks into the future, which is like really sad, like really emotional stuff about sort of confronting his own sexuality and things like that, and he'll never get the chance. And then it gets weird as we go to the daughter, and she doesn't look to the past. She doesn't look to the future. She has this dream, and it's just her, and she's in this big room with an oversized spider and this white-robed fellow with long hair and a big beard. And I think this is Rick from the top of the mountain at the end of the issue with the that's the whole joke of the issue over and over. The etymologist. Right. Where he's climbing the mountain, issue 28. Yeah. And what do we make of that? Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing that like threw me for this issue. Like, we got to get the sprinkling of Ice Cream Man in here somehow, right? Like, and quite honestly, I shouldn't say we gotta. Like, W. Maxwell Prince and Martin Morazzo can do whatever the fuck they want.
And frequently on many times they've been like, we're not obligated to really like, they're like ongoing themes, but don't think we have to show them to you with frequency.
Right. So the fact that we got this scene at all is very interesting to me because it's like, this is just another example of like the pervasiveness of this character. And again, I think I've talked about like, Ice Cream Man kind of growing larger. I think this is him ascended, right? He has ascended into a greater being, or he's playing with the notion of the narrative that humans have in their head, because we know that Ice Cream Man is not a human entity, right? And so I think he's playing with the notion of like, what does ascension mean for me? Like, what does it look like to these humans? So when he appears to them as this like savior like character, I wouldn't say Christ-like, but I would say like elevated. This like there's a mix of Buddhism, there's a mix of Christianity, there's a mix of just like the chilled, laid back, like
Buddy Christ.
Buddy Christ. Like, no, just like this is like the chill, laid back, like person who has found higher meaning in themselves. Right now, of course, it's paired with this monstrous, kind of not as horrifying as we've seen in the past spider.
Yeah. It actually looks like a normal spider. I mean, a big spider, but normal spider.
Normal.
Yeah.
Very interesting, but I think the thing that is, I'll leave it to you. You put it in your notes. Is that the end moment with that character is maybe the most confusing thing for me. That kind of makes me wonder, like, where are we going with this? Like, is this going to continue to be a motif? And if so, like, why are things changing a little bit? Right? I don't know. Like, maybe I'll just steal this from your notes here, Nick. But at the end, he says "splickety lick," which is not his slogan, right?
Right.
Like, lickety split is the slogan, and so like this is definitely Ice Cream Man, but at the same time, like, is something different? Is it just the bit here that's happening? Is it like,
is it meant to literally just be nothing else, but basically for those people who didn't figure it out, be like, hey, this is Rick?
Yeah. But like, you would think that Ice Cream Man in this moment, given how he's existed throughout the rest of this series, would take this moment and actually deliver a line to be like, hey guys, or like, life can be over, lickety split. Like, he could say anything, right? Some kind of sarcastic 50s era mantra that would totally work for his moment.
Poor girl, her parents were going to divorce anyway. So it's
he has the time. So why did that change? I don't know. Maybe implications that something is changing. Who knows?
Yeah, there's something there. There's definitely something there. Yeah. But
but that is the first part of this story, right?
Yes.
Which I did say this, they are pairs, but they're connected together. But you could read this and be done. You do not have to read the other side of this.
Yes. You could read one and not read two, but
right.
I think you'd have a hard time reading two and not reading one. It would be
totally agree.
There's definitely at the very least there's like redundancy. Like two is like, we know we already talked about this, but blah 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 blah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where we get to issue 40, the last issue in the volume, Decompression in a Car Crash Part 2, where we see the other side of the story, the truckers that are driving and how they came into this situation that got us into this car crash. Or was it them? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of motifs. There's a lot of bits that come back to people yelling, right? Which I think is a very interesting thing. Like, we just get these black panels in issue 39 of like, watch out for the truck, or whatever the wife says.
Right.
And it's interesting to see like the parallel on the other side as we get to our two characters, Judd and Mike. So Nick, tell us about this issue. Where does it go? Because this is the one that we probably need to wrap in like 10 minutes, but I think we're going to talk the most about.
Yeah. And I think that's obviously because, as I said at the beginning, in some ways it feels like, intentionally or not, it feels like this book was written as an arc of issues. And there are definitely things and callbacks and motifs that you see in especially the first two issues that finally come back around all the way at the end of this issue. So I did find that interesting. So yes, this is the other side of the car crash, following Judd and Mike. They're truckers for Rick Sweets, which of course we know is a subsidiary of the Holt Dairy Company, which of course we know is a subsidiary of the Holt Corporation, et cetera, so on and whatnot. I think the most fucked up thing for me in this book is that they mention that they're unionized, which does not seem like a very Rick's does not seem like a very Holt company thing to me. I read that and I was like, this does not seem in character at all. Like, maybe it's not a very good union, but when I saw that, I was like, really? That seems not in character. But so we're following it from their perspective. And of course, the real elevator pitch here, of course, is that they're traveling down the road. They've got these cows and this dairy product. Judd is celebrating the fact that he's got a PhD in like short fiction. He's been trying for a while to get himself published in the New Yorker. He's tried and been rejected 3 times in a row. And the 4th time he actually got his short story approved, and it's going to be published soon. And so they're going back and they find a beer and they're like, all right, let's celebrate. And they pour it into the glass. And just immediately following that is when we get the crash. And we start to have the same sort of decompression effect that we saw in the first issue take place once again in this second issue from literally the other side of the accident. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is an interesting issue because I think like we got this very deep, but a little hurried introspective of the family in issue 39. So with only 2 other people to really talk about in this issue, it's I don't know. I thought that the exploration of Judd and Mike was very like thoughtful in a way, in that like I think the whole point of the issue is that no one is at fault here in some ways, right? Like the truckers couldn't do anything about it. It was an accident on the side of the car, and yet this is a thing that happened. And each of these people involved, the 4 family members as well as the 2 truckers, they all had very specific, and intricate lives.
Yeah. Prince calls it out and he says, when he's referring to the 2 of them, he says, they both have souls. The family in the soon to be smashed suburban 4-door, they have souls too, which is an interesting thing to say, because at the end of Garyland, Escape from Garyland, Gary exclaims or points out, I have a soul. And in the letter that he read from Gary 59, he also points out, we all have souls, blah, blah, blah. He also emphasizes this idea of people having souls. And I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do with that. Unless it's just trying to make this idea of common shared humanity. I think there's something more here, especially because it's souls with a capital S. Read into that as far as you want. But
I think that there's also like a thing that we pick up on in these volumes where like it seems like Prince is like on a theme sometimes when he's writing, where he'll have a notion that he wants to explore, and he'll explore it in multiple ways throughout the issues that he goes through. I think this may be an example of that. That said, I do agree, capital S souls feels different than just saying, oh, these people have souls lowercase, right? Like it's very, very interesting. And I wonder if you dug through the archives of Ice Cream Man here, if you found other mentions of that. But
I wonder.
Who knows?
And so much like in the previous issue, this decompression explores this idea that not only are we going to get some pretty panel after panel after panel of a man being launched through a windshield in slow motion, but we're also going to get this idea that in between these panels exists infinity. And with that regard, we both get to see Judd's home life, and in these issues, or rather in this issue, in these flashbacks, if you want to call them that, it's more of an exploration of how their lives are being lived contemporaneously, more than it is about flashbacks. So with Judd, we go back and we see sort of his home life and what it's like with his kids and his wife. And I just want to point out, I saw it, guys. I saw that his wife's wearing a sweater that says ICMS 40. It's Ice Cream Man 40th issue. I know that's not a genius one, but I did see it. And I did want to point out that Mike owns a fish named Rick, and it's definitely the Rick. He's got the very green eyes. So
he's pale.
Exactly. So again, sort of feeding into this idea that Rick is just an observer now. He's an observer, and that's sort of the role he's taking. But it's interesting because not only do we have this look at contemporaneous lives, but it's also invites obviously this comparison between Judd and Mike, and obviously they're living very different lives. One of them has this established family and kids and all this other stuff, and Mike is this guy who is very solitary, living alone. He's coming to terms with the fact that he only came out somewhere in his 30s, and sort of still living a very solitary existence, living alone, going to the beach and looking at the sunset by himself, watching terrible reality TV, at home, by himself. And I think the page I really, really like, and I really want to draw attention to, is that we have this page, and it's sort of split in half. It's a double page spread. And on the left, we have Judd being launched through the windshield and just slowly smiling. And panel by panel by panel, we zoom in more and more and more on his smiling face, and we see less and less and less of the carnage and sort of the surrounding accident around him, to a point where by the time it zooms in all the way, it just looks like this happy guy, and you might not even really know what's going on in the background. It could be anything. And on the opposite side of the page, the airbag of the truck is expanding. And as we talked about Judd's face zooming on the left, Mike's face is shrinking on the right, as the airbag confines him, which is just, I think, also just sort of weird when you think about the fact that, spoilers for this issue, Judd is on his way to death, and Mike is actually going to survive. So I thought there is really this interesting. And it's also a transition point, right? Because this page is also the transition point between Judd's backstory and Mike's backstory. So it's also a shift between the two narratives. Anyway, you were saying, Mike?
No, I was going to say it's almost as if like survival is the more painful of the two experiences. That's that was my read on it. Like, I know that even the narration is saying like, oh, you die happy knowing blah, 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 blah. Like, fine. But also, like, existence is pain.
Right. And obviously this clearly has some, hails back in some ways to 37 or whatever that is, or the 5 or 6 other issues that W. Maxwell Prince wants to talk about suicide again. Here we go.
Right.
I'm joking. It's fine.
One thing I will know as we move into Judd's story is that he watches Family Autopsy, and you pointed that out, and I couldn't for the life of me remember where that happened before, because this is definitely a recurring
I think it
thing.
might have been like the phone drive, the telethon.
It's
the telethon?
All the way back in issue 11.
Oh, okay.
Where this is first mentioned, and that's also where the Figgly bumps are from as well. We see like I was looking it up, like Family Autopsy was a bit, and somebody on the TV Tropes wiki said that we see dog people. 100% those are the Figgly bumps. 100%. There aren't dog people in the Ice Cream Man universe. There are Figgly bumps. So all the way back in issue 11 is where we first saw this, because I knew this was a reoccurring bit. I just couldn't remember where, and I didn't want to dig through the issues. But thank the Lord for
TV Tropes.
Google, I guess, and TV Tropes.
Thought we'd never say that.
And by Lord, I do mean Ice Cream Man. But yeah, but yeah, we continue through Judd's story, and it's the fact that it says season 10 is like insane to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyways.
I also want to point out, because we saw this, guys, we are very smart. We are very, very smart, very observant readers. When Mike is getting hired for the dairy trucking, you can see on the wall calendar, it's kind of obscured, but if you parse it out, it's January 17th, 2018. You can also see this on the slightly smaller page a day desk calendar. And I was like, January 17th, 2018. What is this? And I was like, wait, when did this book begin? Sure enough, January 17th, 2018 is when the first issue of Ice Cream Man ended up on store shelves. So
right.
We see what you did. We see it.
At the end of the issue, when he gets the New Yorker copy, it's got an Ice Cream Man on it, and it's published on July 10. And when did this issue come out, Nick?
That exact day. Yup.
Yeah.
Yup.
Exactly.
We're very smart.
I know that they've been delayed on publishing issues of this, but at least, when they're on, and I love that. I love that so much.
Really, guys, we got to get this right, or every time Martin's going to have to go back and edit the Photoshop.
Those fucking guys with the Ice Cream Man podcast are going to scream at us about it.
Yeah. Oh, man. But, yeah, I really like this issue. I really, really do. As I said, I think as a whole, I really like them. And I think in some ways, 40 really gets to fly because 39 is such a good foundational issue explaining the concepts and ideas going on. And it's obviously juggling a lot more people than 40 is trying to do. But yeah, I just really like this issue. I really like this idea that you're following these two guys that are really, in some ways, just an exercise sort of in opposites that really get along. Like, it's not an issue of political differences or anything like that, but just they live very different lives. They've got very different things going on in both of their lives. But they're these really, really good buds. I think they even say at one point, they love each other. No, maybe not in the way you're thinking or something like that.
Yeah. And it's funny to see that paired with the previous issue too, right? Where or not previous issue, but 2 issues ago with the Garys, where they, the big friendship thing is such a big thing for Gary 38. It's interesting that like we're getting tales about this. I guess again, is it a coincidence or not? I don't know. But yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, it's a crazy book. If obviously we talked about that splash page with the airbag and the launching through the windshield. There's another really great, just like I had to stop and take a look at it, just fucked up page where it's shifted and the perspective from the front to the back is the whole crash. So you've got a Judd face down on the ground right in front of you, and right behind him is the destroyed sedan, and right behind him is the truck, and right behind the truck are the cows coming out, and you just literally have this processional shot that you can see the whole thing from the front to back, and it's just it's really messed up, and it's really impressive.
Beautiful little details. The car's license plate is ICM 39, right?
Yep.
And as the story goes forward, now we know that this is a thing that Martin keeps doing for us because he's incredible. But a couple pages later, we get a hidden little IRCB in the background. I finally sent the screenshot over to him because I'll be honest, I hadn't read this volume yet, so I just saw it. He was very pleased that we found it. So, you know, it's, you know, this book's all about the details. But yeah, that single or 2-page spread is just absolutely gorgeous. Like, it's one of those things where you're like, there's a lot of empty space, but like the detail in the moment and the bits where there are details are tragically perfect. Given the situation.
I mean, full credit to Morazzo. I did not catch that the first time I read this issue. I didn't.
Yeah.
And for those who are curious, it's towards the end of the issue. Like I said, Mike survives and goes to New York, and it's one of the pages where he's walking through New York, and it's above is it a blue car? It's
like a bus.
Yeah, it's a bus. One of the marquees is IRCB. So yeah. A
lot of ICMs in that page too, right? In the background.
Yes.
We do see a picture of the Holt CEO, Jeremiah Holt.
Yes.
Which I don't know if we've seen him before.
I
but
think
like,
we did. I could be
still.
I think we did, but
the person that is selling the New Yorker copy to our Mike in the issue is Ice Cream Man. Clearly, those green eyes. Who else could it be?
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's very interesting. I don't know. Like, again, little details for things to probably come in this series.
Right, and I think the last big thing that we could spend 10 episodes on, because
easily,
good God, at the end, we actually get to read Judd's short story published in the New Yorker. And God, what is the shortest I can put this? When you start to read this story, and as you make your way through this story, you get the idea, or I got the idea, gosh, are we just literally recounting issues 39 and 40 from a prose perspective instead of comics? And I'm like, okay, I get it. Morazzo, Prince, they're trying to show us, you know, clearly in the issues we were talking about decompression, and in this we're talking about, you know, how we can approach a narrative through prose versus comics, right? It's an exercise in comparison. But as the story goes on, you realize it's not the same story.
I mean, I'll say to Danny, if you're listening to this episode, this is one piece of prose you really should not skip if you're trying to get the full Ice Cream Man experience.
Yes, especially because, like I said, I started reading this story and I was like, oh, how quaint. They put it in prose, blah, blah, blah. I don't need to read the rest of this. They just made, you know, I just read the comic. Like, I don't, you know, to some extent, I was like, I don't need this. But I keep reading, and then you realize it's not the same.
Right.
Things are different.
Well, yeah, right. And so, like, it's interesting that they, you know, that they did this in the sense of, like, then, you know, the implication here is that Judd saw this coming, right? Or he predicted exactly what was going to happen.
I think there's like 7 different theories, but let's hear yours, because I think
so. My thought is that, like, Judd did the thing that
is this like a Donnie Darko? Is he Donnie Darko and he's escaping the jet engine?
No, we're going back to the issue about the author who said he couldn't write a happy story, right?
Right.
So we are reading the happy story that another author wanted about a bleak scenario, right? Because everybody survives, nobody dies. We actually get the story that is like bad shit happens, but everything ends up okay, right? It is one of the most horrifying things you could imagine, a head-on collision at 70 miles an hour from both sides. Like, that is awful, and yet everybody gets out okay. It's like the author trying to do that. Now, again, we're at this like meta layer of like the author, who I believe is the same author as that previous issue where he was talking about, I can't write happy stories, right?
Right.
Has then written a character who can write those happy stories. So they're like processing their own shit through a character, but the story that they actually write, the author of this book, which is W. Maxwell Prince, but in like this fake sense.
Right. We feel that like there's a W. Maxwell Prince author that exists within the universe.
Yes.
That's who we're speaking of. Yes.
And they wrote this story that's actually decompression in a wreck, right?
Right.
And the character that they or the story they really wanted to write was the way that it could have been by Judd Terrapin, right? That's my take on it. Now, one other thing that I'll say really quick, there is a nice little bit in the prose here. He calls out good old fashioned vanilla. Nick, do you know what the name of issue number 4 was of this series, or issue number 3? Good old fashioned vanilla was the
interesting.
Rock All the Time issue.
Rock Around the Clock or whatever.
Yeah.
The
Rock All the Time.
The faded
that's what
musician dude. Yeah.
Anyways, just a little, again, another Easter egg that is like living 40 issues previous. It's crazy. But okay, tell me your theory about this prose thing, or at least one of them. Before we wrap up here.
One of the things that I find, there's a couple things I find really interesting about this. One, Mike seems to have these really copper orange eyes that I could swear used to be a signal in this book that the character is Caleb. Maybe there's something there. Also, what do we make of the fact that Mike blurts out Judd the car weeks before the accident when he's at home sitting in front of his TV, and he just suddenly blurts it out? And they say something to the fact of like, oh, did these words come from another universe? Now, when they talk about why this happened differently, the book mentions, quote, that time had a choice. And I'll tell you the part that still gives me chills is it goes through everybody following the accident, right? Everybody survives, but it talks about what they go on to do after this accident. And it talks about the daughter. And if you remember when we talked about the daughter earlier, the daughter had that weird dream. And it says, that Evelina, she grows up, she actually becomes a representative for Holt Dairy. She ends up traveling a lot of the same routes and going to a lot of the same places that her father did. But every time she goes by this wreck site, she stops and has a sense that, quote, that in some other universe, in someone else's book of the wreck, it all might have gone a little differently. And it really, for me, starts to play into this weird multiverse theory, because this book has definitely leaned in multiple times to this idea of like, in another universe, this is what happened, or in another world, this is what happened. And I think what gets sort of fucked up or weird when you start to think about that a little, and I think it's just the way we think about things, right? Things can't be both, right? It's either, it's black or it's white, it's up or it's down. It becomes a question of like, what is the real universe? What is the true universe? What is canonical? However you want to frame this. And I think what gets sort of weird is like, I look at this, and I know this is crazy, but I start to think like, has Ice Cream Man so thoroughly like corrupted and distorted and fucked up this world to a point where like the real story is this fake story that's being written as a short story? And like, that's like the true idea of things. And this frame narrative of this terrible accident is like the Ice Cream Man's like doing, like, that's his world. I don't know.
Right.
This idea that they go back to that, like, in some other world, in some other universe, things are different or things could be different. I think that's, there's something there. The fact that it feels like Evelina has this, and I don't think we see this with any of the other people, right? They don't seem to retain these ideas or visions or whatever or anything, but she seems to hold on to this weird fragment where she can sort of, you wouldn't even call it remembering, but she seems to sort of have or hold on to this weird idea in her head of what exists in this other place.
Interesting.
Nobody else comes out of it seemingly knowing or thinking about this other alternative, but she seems to be aware of it, right? I think that's interesting.
You've got me completely boned here now, Nick. I like this idea of has Ice Cream Man turned fiction into reality and reality into fiction, because I think that seems to be the direction that a lot of the story is going. But Oh man, sorry. I'm skimming through some old issues of the series to be like, where else are we seeing some of this? Because I was trying to find a picture of Caleb. I can't seem to find it. One thing I did find
he would
is
be
that
the drifter in the train in
he is the drifter.
Yeah.
So the one that I did find is that in issue 12, in the space issue, there's a B-O-B, B capital O lowercase b robot, and I'm like, okay, so everything's the same. Everything's there.
Oh my God.
I just love it.
I did not know that the Bob robot was going to be that's
a callback.
Interesting.
I know.
And why is it B up? I've wondered about that too. Why is it B and then big O and then B? What is?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Caleb's eyes are brown, so who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe Mike is a representation of Caleb. I don't know, but
maybe.
Anyways, I understand now why 39 won or was nominated for an Eisner, right?
Yeah.
I understand it. I was like, wow, Ice Cream Man getting some recognition finally. But like having read it finally, I am floored by that issue. I genuinely think it is like a great commentary on comics while also being an extremely entertaining piece of comic book in general. So yeah, I really hope the guys win. I need to get my hands on a copy of that hardcover of Decompression in a Wreck because I never got that. I only been buying like the trades and stuff like that, but that wasn't like on the trade list for my shop. So
it's gonna be interesting. I hope they win too. It is going to be interesting to see people who have. I assume there will be some, right? You and I both know people that are on the show who like to read all of the Eisner nominees. It's going to be interesting to see people that have never read Ice Cream Man read that issue. I think that's going to be
true.
It's obviously not a lore heavy issue, but I mean, the level of, I mean, it's not gratuitous, but it is tough to look at in some spots. And obviously the book, the book acknowledges that, right?
Yeah.
But I would be very curious to pick the brain of people who have just never read this series before and are reading that issue. But
I mean, honestly, when I think you and Brian started this series way back in the day, and I've been thinking about that a lot as I've been reading this volume. I'm just like, well, I didn't think that this series was going to last as long as it did, and I didn't think that the series was going to be as interesting as it ended up being. And that is a reflection on me, not on the creative team. I'll be real here.
Well, like, and I didn't pick up this book until I think it had been out for maybe maybe a year, maybe a year and a half, just because the covers were scaring the shit out of me.
Yeah.
you want to be total. I feel like a 5-year-old. The covers are very scary. Honestly, like, for maybe a year there, I kept reading about it and I was like, there's a lot of stuff I like here, but these covers are terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, I understand it. It is a heavy book overall. I mean, but that's the thing. We've been reading this and I'm only saying this because we're finishing up volume 10 here, and I'm so pleased that this book continues to push itself and do such interesting stuff. I think Prince is at the top of his game. I think Morazzo is like just flicking through the first like 6 issues of this. I'm like, the dude's art was great, and he has gotten even better over time, and I love to see it. So yeah, this is. I think this is the best volume yet. I really had a great time reading this one. I think compared to the last 2 volumes where I was kind of like, I liked them a lot. Like, do not get me wrong, but like in comparison, this is a like knock out of the park in terms of just like quality, interesting stories, everything that's happening. And again, Decompression to Wreck is a masterpiece from start to finish. Like both issues, just fantastic.
Yeah, definitely like the last 2 volumes. It felt like those were volumes where I had issues I liked and issues that I thought were fine. But this volume is just completely lights out end to end. Like I said, even though I felt going into our discussion that maybe I didn't really like the Figgly Bumps issue, but I think after our discussion, I do think that there is definitely more to talk about there, especially even once we started teasing out these threads that go back, as you said, even into the single issue or barely double issue, double digit, numbered issues.
Yeah, I think that's a thing that I'm going to have to do next time we do one of these, is that I'm going to have to just do a quick skim of the whole series.
Just reread
Not read it, but just quick skim. I think volume 4 I think they're getting back on track and releasing issues now. So like, it'll be interesting to see when volume 11 comes out. But man, I'm look forward to it. I think I'm just going to dive in and read 41 and 42 like right now, and I'll go back.
Yeah,
and read them later.
Honestly, that was immediately where my brain went. Like I usually wait to have a couple banked, and I've got a couple banked, and maybe now is the time. I know that there's one coming up where it's like clearly like a 007 James. I'm sure you've seen it, that James Bond cover,
the
and
cover
I'm like,
looks great.
What's this? Yeah,
I know.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to read that tonight after this. So, anyways, I think Nick, that's probably a good spot for us to wrap. Folks, I'm sorry we went a little long, but obviously a lot to say about this issue.
Sorry we went a little long, but like, look, the book got an Eisner nom now, and God help us.
Right.
Those last 2 issues, I already said it. Like, you could talk about the short story for like 5 hours all by itself. So
if you got this far in the episode, I'd love for you to send me an email and let me know what you thought of those 2 issues together. If you just read those 2, that would be great too. But let us know. Nick, I look forward to the next volume of this. I just pulled up the 007 cover homage, so I think I'm going to just read that right after we get off this call. Right. But this has been great, man. Any final thoughts here before I wrap up the episode?
No, there's not much that really hasn't already been said. It's a really great volume. If the last couple volumes you felt like maybe it was, there were highs and lows, I think that this volume is just absolutely lights out end to end, and it's a great exploration, a great fearless exploration of a lot of the tough topics that this book is not afraid to prod and poke at.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a perfect summation. Thanks, Nick. Well, I guess to wrap up here, I'll say thank you to Zander for editing. Thank you to everyone out there for listening. If you read this series and you got this far in the episode, send me an email with an ice cream emoji in it, and I will send you back something nice. I think that's going to do it for us tonight. So until next time, comics are good, and so are you.